It has never been easier to go from having an idea to building a business. One-person companies are popping up everywhere, and you can build one without being very technical. But what's the best path for would-be entrepreneurs to take? How do you de-risk the dependence on the big AI labs? On episode 69 of Tool Use, we're joined by Mike Leslie. He's the CEO of Revela, a company that builds AI and ML systems for early-stage companies. We're going to cover things you should consider when building your business, when you should bring AI in-house, and a lot more. So please enjoy this conversation with Mike Leslie.
So we work with primarily early stage startups, AI native startups. We actually heavily focus on the Silicon Valley area because that's where most of the funding is and most of the kind of industry growth is, obviously in tech. So we get hired to basically help them build out more of the core AI functionality. So we often get paired with really strong the idea people, right? So and it's really interesting because founders now, so we're meeting, and I'm actually meeting people more and more. I'm seeing this, and it's just really interesting to see how it evolves. Is I'm seeing non-technical founders. These are the people who come from an industry, right? And they've seen a pain point, and they're like, I think this can be solved with an AI sort of play, right? In this niche thing that nobody else really knows deeply. They know it so well, but they have no technical background, no engineering really. And with using Cursor and vibe coding and leveraging AI tools like dev tools, it's incredible to see how far they get. They're basically building MVPs that are functional, within limitations, and it's not a scalable commercial product. They know that as well. It's really cool. They really are self-aware of sort of the limitations they're finding, but they can get this far to get customers on board. They're signing pilots, initial clients based on this MVP they vibe coded on this platform, and then they're now taking that investors. And I've seen some getting pre-seed or maybe even a seed round, depending on how compelling the story is, of financing as a solo founder with no CTO or technical team. So it's really and normally 5 years ago, that would be at minimum a 2-person founding team, a CTO who's been coding like hell for, the last 6 months or a year even to build the same thing. Granted, it would be a much more robust and something you could build off of, because it's the vibe coding, it's a big spaghetti mess of code basically, but it proves a use case, which is super important. It signals what investors are looking for. So it's compressed that 0 to 1 stage insane. And what's causing is a new demand of as a tech team, this kind of incoming demand of not so much starting from the beginning, but taking that idea, that MVP, either fixing it, so getting in there and actually addressing a lot of the issues that come from the code gen side of it, and someone who just has no idea what really they're doing on the engineering side, or just sort of starting from scratch. But the nice thing is you got funding, you got an idea, you've proven an MVP, and you got clients signed up, so you're so much further along in the business, which makes it a much more high sort of conviction of bringing in that tech team. And so the role that we often play with these founders, they and I think a lot of them are thinking maybe I don't need to ever bring a CTO in. I can just run this thing, because they get so far in the early days. So it's really fascinating to see that. And I think investors are struggling with it too, because they're not trying to decide the value of an MVP with clients and even maybe revenue is skewed now, because they're oh my god, someone else could vibe code that in a weekend as well. So this the landscape is just so in flux right now with early stage investing. It's really interesting.
It's super interesting. And yeah, tech is very rarely a moat now. You can very quickly spin up an idea. And I love the idea of trying to encourage more people who are domain experts to go through with this and actually try to solve a problem in a meaningful way. There's still the issue where it's pretty intimidating for people. So do you have any advice for people who want to take that plunge and, whether it's just hack on an evening and weekends on something or even just go all in? How should they take the first few steps? What can build the confidence to actually understand that they're not going to waste their time, or they're not going to build something that just falls flat on its face? How can they get the confidence to just explore and build and go for it?
So there's sort of 2 tracks, for the audience, for a non-engineer, non-technical person. What I kind of describe is sort of a great way, just be an AI super user. It's amazing how far you can now get in the sort of startup life cycle through just vibe coding and leveraging AI dev tools. and that'll validate because you might it's great because you can like get really deep into it, keep it simple, just be yourself and like and be a solo basically founder with like no hired like team or anything at all. And you get to the point where an investor will say that's a stupid idea, and you'll get that signal over and over again, and you just drop it, right? Because you know you're not solving a problem, or maybe customers are completely falling flat. So it allows you to like prove out your idea really well now before like committing fully in through like a big round or a bunch of funding coming in or like bringing in like that team, right, to like sort of like actually build proper scalable product. On the tech side, so if you're like an engineer, obviously you understand coding and you're likely gonna like, for them, you know, AI dev tools are more about accelerators, right? So you're gonna build your MVP ideally is like a much more sound, robust system that's like you understand it, you know what the code is under the hood and how it's structured and how it's deployed and all the components and everything. You can do that really fast as well to prove out a like sort of an idea. It honestly, I think on the tech founder side, like it doesn't really change how you go about it. It just means you're going faster. Like, but you still would like build a tool that you think is solving a problem, and then you'll get to like an MVP a lot sooner. Thing about this though is like, as a tech person, you want to mind your moat. You mentioned like the lack of a moat, and that's really true. Like, I'm a big advocate of like as soon as it makes sense, like bringing your AI in house, right? You can, and that's just through grabbing open source models, maybe like fine tuning, pruning something down so it's like a small language model. That's maybe you don't even use a language model. Everyone just assumes it's got to be an LLM for every use case. Well, no, there's like dozens or hundreds of other machine learning models that specialize, that are lightweight, that are easy to tune. You don't need a lot of data, and you can solve problems. So it's like, but I think only technical people can think about that level because, like, as a non-technical person, you only understand I can just use ChatGPT or I can use Claude or whatever it is, right? And you're so like you only see the surface level, which is all LLMs, which are generally overkill, but super generalist and like relevant. So yeah, so I think as a technical person, I think like summary in my mind would be still think critically about how you're building it and be smart about what you leverage. But you'll be able to go a lot faster. From the business side, you get a lot faster and defer bringing that technical team in and actually maybe get someone to put money in the business and then get customers and then launch the thing.
To focus on the non-technical founder side, because I think they need a little more guidance. Because like you said, when you're technical, it's an accelerant.
Yeah.
But for the non-technical, it's really an enabler where previously you weren't capable of accomplishing this.
Yeah.
Do you have any experience or have you seen what stack or what tools tend to be most beneficial? Are you seeing people use a lot of Cursor or what about like the lovable bolts, like the front end things? What tools do you think people should look into if they're totally new to the space?
Yeah, Cursor's big. Like Claude Code seems to be sort of like maybe starting to get ahead in that race. It seems a little bit, and but I think they're all relatively similar. Like I mean, like and I'm not like a coder myself now anymore, so I can't like have it. I don't have an opinion about like the nuance of like which one's a little bit better than the other. I think they're all generally solving the same problem. So whatever like makes sense to you, like cost wise, or whatever has like a interface that makes is easy to use. I think the output is roughly going to be the same thing that you're going to get. Really, it's like basically it's like using Cursor or it's using for like building the thing, and then yeah, maybe Lovable is to like throw up a website or something. I honestly have heard many people using Lovable. I don't know like I know Lovable, all people are using Lovable, but maybe it's one of the design world because like I haven't met a single like tech AI founder who's like mentioned Lovable ever. But I know they're exploding, so someone's using it, and just not in my circles. But and then just ChatGPT just for like generating decks, so they're like crushing like investor decks like super fast. They're just generating like all their like data rooms and like cap tables and like I think just all that paperwork is sort of like investor materials. Like you can just generate stuff so fast now. And I'm not saying like legal documents per se. This is just like the information that you need to like share to investors to like pitch decks, executive summaries, kind of like get a cap table together or whatever, which isn't a legal thing. It's just sort of a view of like how your ownership structure is there. So all that can be accelerated like crazy fast, and just lean on those tools like crazy. Go as far as you can, prove your idea. But then when you talk to investors, like just get in front of it. Be like, we don't have an IP moat. Don't try to fake like you do because they know you don't. No one does. But what you say is, I have a deep understanding of this industry. Make it like, call it like, I literally met a guy who's from construction. He's a roofer recently in SF. Basically, vibe coded a whole product, and it's solving this distinct issue with contractors that only contractors know and is a pain point in that industry. Like we're talking about trades contractors, and it's a very real problem. And I've like sort of even vetted this with other tradespeople that I know, friends of mine, and he's gotten like he's basically now pitching investors and he's signing up clients and no tech team at all, and it's pretty incredible to see that journey. But basically, he's just an AI like super user, I would call it. Leverages every tool available, and they can just get so far. It's amazing, really.
I love that story, and that's exactly right. If you're an expert in a domain, you're going to know how to solve the problem better than most, especially when you're leveraging these tools. Do you have recommendations for people who get to the point where they put something together and they're happy with it? Should they try to get a few users? Should they go straight to investors? Like, how can they try to like go to the next level with the product?
Yeah, it's still early, but like on the little bit of like insights I'm getting through sort of talking to these founders, it seems, yeah, just emphasizing like the fact that you're an expert in your domain because AI isn't replacing that, right? Like these are all accelerants for like doing tasks and things, but like you as the human who's like worked in whatever your industry, call it construction for 20 years, like you know these like deep pain points. And I think like emphasizing that to investors is like what people are looking for because they're like, again, the tech moat doesn't really live there anymore because everybody's just like vibe coding and leaning on like APIs. So I'd say start there. Ideally, like get a few customers that like sign LOIs or whatever, and again showing that traction. Like all investors love that to see a little bit of like validation from the market, and then go raise. And when you raise, just be transparent. Be like, the money you're going to give me, I'll bring in the tech team who's going to come in and like build up the solution, make it production grade, and like actually, and then and also have a strategy around like I recommend like bringing your AI in house. So again, saying okay, you're going to give me $5 million, and we're going to hire the team, bring that team in. Maybe you hire internally, maybe you pull in like a group like Revela. It doesn't really matter. It's also sort of solving the same problem, and then they will help us like actually like find open source models that will fine tune this data because we're going to set up our data collection pipeline, and then we'll get the IP mode eventually, right? And have a structured plan so then the investor knows they put the money in. You've got a business case that you're solving. You got a unique insight because you're an experienced like person in that industry. Those are two big check marks. And then you got a plan for like getting a bit of an IP mode in the future, which you can still, right? Because like let's be honest, like Anthropic's not going to like launch a like roofing solution problem at any point in the future. It's like being niche, but like still like in a high value like industry. It's still got a lot of clout to it, I think.
And what do you think should be some of the factors that weigh into a founder's decision whether they go for internal hire or going with an agency like Revela to help build out their solution?
Good question. I'll try to be as like impartial as possible when I answer this, and I think I can be. So there's a lot of scenarios where like bringing an agency partner doesn't make sense. I think where that would be is so it's all about velocity, right? So if as like an agency partner, like you basically like you have a couple conversations, we sort of scope out your work, and within weeks you'll have a whole team up and running and building your thing for you, right? And that's when I find like when customers like or founders' eyes light up and they're like, oh man, I need a team like yesterday. But it's like it needs to be a competent team. They need to have conviction that we're gonna like actually solve the problem, which our focus is on the deep sort of AI, like bringing that AI in house and like building up agentic systems, orchestration. So much heavy on the engineering side, which is good because a lot of these early founding teams, like they can build their own interface and UI, and they got that all covered. That's just like software development, right? It's like much higher level, more accessible. There's a lot of options there, and so yeah. So I'd say urgency is a big thing. So if you've got a funding round that just landed, you need to move really fast. Like a partner like us, a great idea, and then you would probably hire in parallel, like bring that CTO in, or bring in that like founding level engineers. And eventually you would like take it over, and how it's like usually agencies, we have like a lifespan where we like hit fast and hard. But eventually you kind of want to bring all that control in house if you're really going to like grow the thing. And that's totally fine. That's like our expectation, right? And yeah, so I think it's all about velocity. But if you're more of a technical founder who like just really wants to like, have a hands-on grasp of everything you're doing, keeping it in-house makes more sense. You just might not move quite as fast, which again depends on what industry you're in. If you're in an industry where there's a lot of urgency, there's competitors out there, you want to go as fast as you can. But if you got the luxury of time, then yeah, maybe just sort of like pace yourself, bring in that core team, build it up, and then start building the product.
One thing you touched on a couple of times that I'd love to dive into is the idea of bringing the AI in-house. So
Mhm.
it gives you more control over it, but could you go over some of the other benefits as to why someone would want to actually have a system in-house versus just, an OpenAI wrapper?
A really great question. So basically, there's three things that I'm finding are causing people to decide on this. Number one is a little more, call it symbolic, if you will, and it's the ownership piece. It's like the sheer fact that they're beholden to an LLM that's behind an API paywall that technically they have no control over. It doesn't sit well with a lot of founders, and it doesn't sit well with a lot of investors, right? Because they're again like, I'm going to put $10 million into your business. How do I know someone's not going to replicate your thing tomorrow? Like, what's like so? Um, and even if it's like replicatable, like owning and controlling it is like you're not beholden to anybody. Like you just like it's like that the sense of peace of mind that you own it. So that's a piece there. Just IP ownership is valuable intrinsically. It's not immediately valuable, but there's actually two other things that we're finding from an engineering perspective where it actually is operationally valuable to have your AI in house. And again, when I say this, people often are like, "Oh my God, you're not going to run like a 670 billion per hour LLM. Like it's going to cost way too much to train." Like, well, you're not. I'm not saying you're going to do that. And this is a fallacy that people fall into: is they assume that their use case needs the biggest, most generalist, godlike LLM in the world. Well, no, it doesn't. It's like think what your product does, and most founders are building a product for a solution, right? So here's an example like building up like say a design product where you're like you're calling ChatGPT to like set up like designs like product designs in some like UI or whatever, and it's done through like natural language. It's like the LLM just needs to know design. It needs to know shapes, colors, understand like what designers care about. Does it need to know about U.S. history, or does it need to know about geography? Does it need to know about like physics? No, it does not. So it's absurd that your product pings ChatGPT, whatever, or Claude, and asks you the same thing over and over again, and it's a super niche thing. Like what you can do is find an open source model, like maybe it's like a DeepSeek 7B, a much smaller model, easier to work with, easy to fine tune, and like doesn't cost that much. Like you can run it on a single GPU in the cloud, no big deal. You bring that in, make sure it's an MIT or an Apache license, so you're technically unrestricted commercially. I think that you couldn't necessarily argue that it's you own the IP per se. A lawyer would have to kind of like decide that, but you 100% control it and have zero limitations on your ability to control it and manage it, which is the key thing here. So you're not training an LLM from scratch. You don't need to do that. You have foundational models, which are the foundations of language and LLMs, and you build on top of that. You can take that model, you can do things like pruning, quantization, where basically you're shrinking that model. I kind of like talk like almost like giving a model a lobotomy, like remove literally like neurons from it that you don't care about, and you can actually there's techniques to do this. Is really interesting. Don't ask me, ask my CTO and team how they actually do that, but I know it's like possible. I've seen it sort of like firsthand. It's super cool. And then you basically come up with a small language model that's now its knowledge domain is like specific to what you want it to be for your use case. A smaller model has a smaller memory footprint. The inference is way cheaper and faster, and like latency is way down because it's like it doesn't have to like activate this whole like set of neurons that like answer the same question over and over again. And then you can then even make it better by then fine tuning it on your own data. So if you're clever about sort of collecting data, you don't have a data set now, you can set up like Langfuse or whatever and actually collect data in real time early in your product, and you can then start fine tuning that model. And eventually, 6 months in, with like users using your product, you now have a small language model that is specialized to your use case. It's the best at doing your thing, better than any generalist, frontier model. And it's super lean and lightweight and doesn't cost very much to run, and run that. And that's kind of the process of like bringing AI in house that we're sort of seeing, and people are doing this because now they're not beholden to anyone. They're running that. They have full control of their infra and their compute, and it solves sort of like two big bottlenecks that we're seeing. Kind of back to the three things I mentioned earlier. One is token throughput limitations. We've seen a lot of teams, they just like literally maxing out their tokens on OpenAI, and they have to bounce between all these models because their product just, it's a high token volume, right, per for prompts and stuff, and that's just the way the product operates. And they're literally like, we have one client that cannot launch their product because within like a couple minutes they'd be maxing out their API limit usage. And even if they had infinite money, they simply are, the throughput is limited. It's like they're rate limited, so they can't actually like get used on the platform. So the only option is to like bring that stuff internally and manage and control the infrastructure and everything. And then also on the cost side too. So like if you're just paying like a number of cents per token, and that's like a fixed fee for most startups, it is. Your cost curve is just this: as your users go up, every time someone uses your product, your cost goes up, and you can't. So to flatten that, if you want to actually scale and be a profitable business or increase your margins, right? You need to be able to bring that stuff in house and control all like the levers and infrastructure and costs, and then you can. But again, that requires you to like break free from being a thin wrapper around an API.
Yep. And one thing you touched on, which I think is going to be more and more important as we start progressing in this AI industry, is the data collection. Because if you want to fine tune your model, you got to have the data.
Yeah.
A lot of people aren't clear on how the best way to do this. You mentioned Langfuse, but is it best for a company to just try to vacuum up as much as possible? Should they worry about structuring it ahead of time, or leave it to the pros to do and just kind of do a big data dump? What strategies or approaches do you think people should implement when they are just using the OpenAI API to start building this process for their data collection?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll give an answer. Someone on my team would be like, on the tech side would definitely be much better to answer this. Just full disclosure, but I do have like a peripheral sort of like visibility on like what people are doing, and I think so. Yeah, it is important that you're collecting data in a thoughtful way. You don't just like collect everything, because again, you're gonna have a big pile of garbage that you're gonna have to try to learn how to use, and it's not gonna be like constructive really. So be thoughtful about it, yes. Plan around it. Understand like what you're trying to achieve with fine tuning. So it's things like thinking about like mechanisms, like what are trigger points that are interesting, right? For it's essentially like data labels, basically, right? So, and we're actually going through one class really interesting is about like, hey, they got a product and they're saying, well, we're not going to be able to get like user labels, like we're not going to like have our customers constantly answering yes or no questions like through prompts in the platform about whether they liked the output, right? Was it a successful response or not from the model? They're like, it's going to kill UI. So what they're thinking is like, what are actions that correlate to a happy customer with an output or a not happy customer? Things like the undo button, right? So if a customer does something in your product, the model comes back and then you generate like sort of like whatever the thing they're like trying to build in your platform, and if they undo it right away, good chance that weren't happy with it. So just log that, and then you collect that prompt, that and that response as a bad output, right? And then or maybe if they click save or they carry on, maybe minimal modifications, that was a really good one. You almost hit the mark right off the bat, right? So then you build a data set like that. It's like sort of like collecting user actions, and as opposed to like, because people are going to walk over your platform instantly. They're like trying to use it, and they're constantly bombarded with like, hey, please tell me, was this a good response or not from the model? Yes or no? Like, they're not going to want to do that, right? They just want to use your thing and get value out of it. So I think my only kind of big piece of advice is like structured data collection around measurable clicks, behavioral things that you can quietly measure and collect on the side, then trying to get human feedback in real time. So that's going to be a bit of a party pooper.
There's also an argument to be made, especially in the early days, about trying to do things that don't scale and maybe put on like the product manager hat and actually talk to the customers to see how they're using the product in order to get like a little bit more insight rather than what can be collected automatically. Do you have any recommendations for founders in that stage when they're actually just getting their first, dozen customers, how they can try to maximize the benefit from them before they get to the next step?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, a pretty like vanilla response there, I'd say. Like just really, like any product, like talk to your customers as soon as you can. Like that's just the kind of like startup 101 really. Talk to your customers, whether you're an AI product or not, understand what they're like, what they're not liking. I mean, there's probably some nuance there. Like if you got your sort of like if you're like an AI native product and there's like actual like fine tunings and like thoughts around data collection, there's probably going to be maybe a you might structure sort of like engagement with them a little bit differently to try to like seek out responses that allow you to decide how to collect that data better. I think too, like privacy and stuff is important. So you always got to think about like because everyone's very sensitive, rightfully so, about like private data or even not private data, just collecting your behavioral data gets a bit, uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? It's big brothery, and so be careful with disclosures as well. So like you may want to just openly tell your customers like, hey, you're beta users, we're building a data set, we're tracking how you're using the thing so we can make a better model to make the product better, and maybe give people an option to opt out and stuff, right? So I'd say getting ahead of that. It depends on the industry, right? Like if you're like in a loosey goose sort of like, non-regulated industry, it might not matter at all. You bury it in your like terms and conditions that people click when they start the product and no one reads. But if it's like, financial services, healthcare, a much more regulated industry, like legal, then you'd be like want to be upfront and super explicit about it, I think, on how you're doing that would be important.
What skills or roles do you think businesses should consider after they've been built this AI product? So they have it, it's been delivered to them, they put it
Yeah.
into production. What type of maintenance, what type of infrastructure management, what type of things do you think they should start to consider after they actually have the product ready to go?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, well, you're just general software sort of team, right? For your customers gonna want new features, so you got to be able to build out a lot of new features. We find as well that like a lot of the new features on AI products aren't impacting the models necessarily, or like how they're like making predictions, or what the data set looks like. Because usually if the model has a core sort of like purpose of like deciding on something. And then features are more about like how do you present those decisions, right? Or how does the usability, not all the case, but I think it would trend more towards that. So a good software team that just is able to like, get feature requests from clients and you're able to like spin up, new UIs really well, deploy, new features on the front end or even the back end. On the AI side, definitely infrastructure is really important. So especially if you go on like the in-house model route, if you're still a wrapper around ChatGPT, it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about AI infra at all. You're outsourcing that to OpenAI. But if you have brought it in, having a good like, ML ops, AI ops, or maybe a more modern term would be like a platform engineer, but with an AI platform engineer would be really helpful. They're a major core part of our team, like because that's what we find is lacking a lot in like these earlier companies is like that deep sort of like infrastructure understanding of like how's data flowing, model uptime, like do you need to deploy that model in multiple regions to serve different customers, managing costs and obviously model accuracy. So like, having like retraining pipelines, monitoring observability is all super important. Again, it's something you don't really worry about until you get to scale, but I mean, you watch how fast these AI native companies grow. Like look at Cursor. I just did a little write up on them recently. They went from in like 2 years they hit over $1 billion in revenue on one product. 2 years is insane, right? And so the velocity. So if you're that, like, you got to be doing infra from like day two. If you're going to be taking off that fast, right? Otherwise, the whole thing's just going to like collapse on you very quickly. So, yeah, heavy on the infra side. The data sciencey piece, like if you get to the sort of like data collection things sorted out, that's more of a lift up front, I think. So you don't need a big like data science team, I don't think. It's more about getting sort of data science, ML engineering, kind of like more heavy on the front load, and then it's more infra maintenance and so yeah, infra is to be like a long term thing, with coupled with your just general software dev team, of course. So you got your, you know, probably some DevOps in there, just a higher level, and then you know, front end, back end engineers. So
Perfect. Yeah, no, good advice. From your experience, what mistakes have you seen founders make? What are some things that people could avoid doing in the early stages to either make the journey smoother or just set up the product for success when they get to the point where they want to bring it in all in house?
it's hard to say what the biggest mistakes are, mostly because sort of I think like everything's so dynamic. I'm not really seeing like trends per se yet, because everything's like so like new in this whole industry. Um, I think maybe what I could say is not, I mean, just not making the leap to like in-house AI sooner. Like, I think if this, like, again, it's so tempting to continue sort of like just relying on the APIs, the frontier models. Um, and again, they have a really valuable thing. They're allowing people to accelerate their products so fast, right? Because they have instant AI that costs like billions of dollars to develop at their fingertips for a flat fee, like that's or a small fee. That's amazing. Don't get me wrong. Um, but deciding how far in your journey can you go before that becomes a problem, right? And I think it's like that's where founders have to kind of really think critically about it because again, I'll use cursors. I've researched them a little more recently. Cursor as an example. They got bitten by this. So basically, they were a thin wrap around Claude. Um, which is great. So they launched this thing. They didn't have to develop any foundational models. They didn't invest all that compute and the AI and like data science and like understanding. They just literally were a bunch of devs out of I think Stanford or something in Berkeley who just like threw a wrapper around a model and Claude was doing all the work, like basically all the work, right? They just packaged it in a way and found a niche that Claude or Anthropic wasn't really thinking about or like pursuing. So that was brilliant. So they found, like, they said it's a coding tool, right? And it was awesome in the beginning because they got this massive velocity trajectory, but then things happened. So Anthropic started saying, "Wait a second, you're our biggest customer. Like you're paying us a ton for tokens, but you know all we need to do as Anthropic is just build Claude Code, put an interface in front of our model that we control. You don't have that model, and now we can take all that market share. We don't need to really work with these partners." So basically, and it did happen. Like, I think there's like some antics between sort of like Cursor might have poached some people. There's some maybe some like troubling, but they were like this like very symbiotic thing where Cursor's success was definitely directly tied to Claude or Anthropic's success because they were like vendors or partners, right? But then Anthropic said, you know what, we're gonna do it ourselves. So and then my understanding is like then Cursor sort of was like a bit frantic. They obviously had to split up. They're now using a bunch of different frontier models. But they said, okay, we got to do it ourselves. So they built their own, developed their own foundational like coding models now, which I believe are sort of like deployed and everything. But that was out of necessity because they're like, oh man, like our entire business is at risk of going extinct because our most beloved partner just decided to compete with us instantly. And so maybe in hindsight, if they just had more foresight, which they did because it's so new, but people can look to them and say, I'm going to be the next unicorn in my category. How do I know that Google's not going to watch that and be like, who's buying all my tokens right now? Or, what's their business? Why don't we just do that and just scrub them out of the whole market, right? Because they control all the AI, which is the core like value that people are paying for. So moving earlier would do two things. They would draw attention to the fact that they're like beholden to Anthropic, and maybe Anthropic never would have thought of like bringing their own Claude Code out as a possibility because they could have like segued away and like not been so like noticeable earlier, and then also just like not being so abruptly disrupted by like all of a sudden their biggest partner now competes with them, which is hugely challenging as like the founding team, right? So yeah, so getting ahead earlier with that I think would be better, but when that makes sense is hard to say.
It's actually a very interesting dynamic because it emphasizes the reason, like you said, you don't want to have to rely on these people who could eventually compete with you. I recently heard from the OpenAI perspective, they're building the weapons and selling them to their enemies because people are trying to build startups using this approach of start with ChatGPT and then get your own model. So OpenAI is enabling these startups which are trying to compete with them. So it's a really weird dynamic with things going around. Do you see any gaps in the industry or any areas where there's opportunity for tooling to help people start getting their own models, fine-tune their own models. Back in the day, we had Evan Armstrong on who did Augment Toolkit, where if you just upload a directory of files, you can fine-tune a model. Anything like that, where you think there's opportunity that we can help enable more people to have their own models acting in their best interest?
I'm not really sure. I think I'm seeing a lot of like interesting stuff in the decentralized AI space, so like DAIs, like because they're like all open source, right? Like it's like about fighting, this the big bad like closed labs, right? It's like almost like a movement, right? It's very interesting. But so I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in that space about like like training foundational like large models, like full size LLMs through distributed compute, like literally just like everybody on Twitter puts their home like GPUs together and trains models, and they're doing this right now. So it's like almost like breaking this reliance and like allowing like the people to essentially build, develop, and then even monetize their own AI, which is super interesting stuff. So broadly speaking, in that space, I think it's going to solve some of these challenges of being beholden to a for-profit closed like lab that can just do whatever they want to do and like honestly screw you at some point if they choose to. But also, I would say more like granularly, which we're seeing, or I'm seeing a gap, which is becoming real noticeable, is like there's this like what do you do after you vibe code this MVP, right? So I talk about all these like maybe non-tech founders like are able to like get really far, but you hit this massive cliff, right? Where they can't launch the thing, they can't scale it because it's like there's no real consideration for like production grade quality or scalability around these systems. So, you know, and that's like I'm thinking like the work we're doing, like Revela, like helping people like picking up where there's a vibe coded MVP and actually turn it into a real product. At some point, there's going to be AI that can probably do that. Like the next mile of like, so it's almost like cleaning up the AI slop from like code gen tools. If someone could solve that in a productized way, whether it's AI or not, I don't know. It might not be an AI product, but if you could find a way that you could like take all these like rapidly generated MVPs and then convert them without requiring like a development team to do it, but more productized, that would be hugely valuable because that would like sort of like allow these like non-tech founders to just continue their journey and get deeper into like building products at scale. So yeah, that would be a really big market for sure.
One question I've been asking a lot of people lately is what AI tools do you wish exist to help with your day-to-day life, whether personal or work?
Oh, honestly, one of the things, and then something we're actually start building on the side here at Revela, because we do a little bit of an IP, projects for a team that are like not
Nice.
on client project stuff. So it's dealing with like comms and going async. So like I think like as like a executive level or like any like CEO or like manager knows your life is just in communications, right? Async. They're all async teams now, or so much of us are. So it's like literally I'm living in email and Slack like constantly, right? And I'm thinking that's just typing. You're sitting there, you're just typing nonstop, which makes sense because we're living in an async world. So async comms are still absolutely essential and need to maintain that. But I would love to just wake up in the morning and have a good, reliable agent, personal assistant that just walks me through all the latest stuff in Slack, all the latest stuff in email, all the latest Slack stuff in, whatever other channels, WhatsApp, Telegram, Twitter, DMs, and just summarizes that. And then through voice, as a voice thing, I can just walk through, get summaries of conversations, reply to things in my voice and my tone, and sort of like buy back. Again, it's not the communication because like that's important. You can't replace that. Like that's your full job is like in management is to like communicate, align people, and do that async work. But breaking free from the keyboard is what I think is like the mechanical action of sitting there typing seems absurd, and bring it back to like I think like how did humans evolve originally? Like we talked. It was verbal, real time. It was all verbal. So allowing the verbal thing but like retaining the async, and I think AI can really do that, would help immensely in just getting people away from just sitting there typing constantly, because I think how many hours of typing is done, across the world with every management team and business person, it's insane, right? If you can just talk through that, it's way faster, right? But you can't do it because you need the async, so you actually can't. You have to type in Slack or whatever because the whole purpose of it is to be effective asynchronously. But trying to like bridge that, like bring it back to like making it more individually synchronous, but through AI agents, and then that would be interesting. So that's something that I like kind of like love to explore more. It's very much a voice AI, text to speech sort of like problem, and it's not really solved as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and I mean, ever since I switched to using Transcriber, I would say 50 to 70% of my interaction with that computer is through voice, whether it's just prompting constantly or leveraging voice to use Open Interpreter to do some automations. It just, you move so much faster. The bandwidth is greater. And this whole idea of having the summary has actually come up before. Like, it definitely feels like something a lot of people are trying to hover around. So I hope we solve it soon. Mike, this was awesome. Really appreciate it. Mike, this has been great. Really appreciate having you on. Before we let you go, is there anything you want the audience to know?
Yeah, I would just say, it's been a pleasure here working with you, Mike, and your podcast is amazing. If anybody, is looking for help on the dev side, so if you're, a startup founder, you got a company, you're early, maybe you've got a pre-seed, seed, even a Series A round, and you're looking to kind of move fast and bring that AI in-house, like, come chat with me because, we're always happy to talk. And find me on LinkedIn, Revela.io is our website. You can find us there as well. So, yeah, anyways. Been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Mike Leslie. I think it's really important that if you're an expert in your domain, if you've been working in something for a while and you know how to solve a problem, to try to turn that into a product, maybe even turn into a business. We need people who know what they're doing to create the solution so more people can benefit from it. And you never know where that can go. And if you've already taken that first step and need to get to the next level, check out Revela. They built some amazing stuff and it's a really good team. If you could please like and subscribe, it would really mean a lot, and I'll see you next week.